I'm one of those people who prefers a quiet evening over a noisy crowd. The idea of loud parties, blaring music, and drunk people stumbling around has always made me uncomfortable. It's not that I'm antisocial. I enjoy spending time with close friends or having meaningful conversations over dinner. But the chaos of big gatherings, especially those fueled by alcohol, makes my skin crawl. When someone drinks too much and starts acting out, I feel almost physically sick. It's hard to watch someone who was perfectly normal just hours before turn into a disheveled mess, barely standing, shouting incoherently, or even worse, picking a fight. I can't help but wonder, how does this seem fun to anyone? The worst part is how often these parties lead to situations that people regret. Drunken hookups, fights, broken friendships, and even ruined relationships. Sure, I'm not completely against going out. I can go to a bar with a couple of friends, have a few drinks, and enjoy a good conversation, as long as it doesn't turn into a chaotic mess. But what I absolutely can't stand are office parties. Corporate events are the worst. People who aren't even friends, sometimes even rivals, suddenly become best buddies after a few drinks, hugging and laughing as if they've known each other forever. It's all fake, and I can't stomach that kind of insincerity. The aftermath of these events is often messy too. People say or do things they regret, leading to awkward confrontations at work the next day. Some end up in serious trouble, fights with family members, disciplinary action at work, or even firings. And sometimes relationships fall apart because of one drunken mistake. But my girlfriend Amelia had a completely different view on these events. She loved them. For her, it wasn't about the fake camaraderie or the excessive drinking. It was about letting loose, dancing, and just having fun outside the constraints of daily life. She loved jumping to the music, laughing with her coworkers, and simply enjoying the moment. She was always careful, though, or so I thought. When we first started dating, Amelia told me about a past relationship that had ended after an office party. Her boyfriend at the time had been out of town and couldn't go with her. Amelia went alone, had too much to drink, and woke up the next morning in the arms of a guy from another department. Her boyfriend didn't forgive her, and they broke up after a year and a half together. When she told me this, she seemed genuinely regretful. She said it had been a painful lesson and that she had changed since then. I believed her. We all make mistakes, and I thought she had learned from hers. Our relationship was strong. We dated for years, moved in together, and eventually set a wedding date. Amelia had matured, or so I thought. She seemed more grounded, more responsible. I was happy and excited about our future together. But then, just before New Year's, something happened that shattered all of that. A few days before the holiday, Amelia became unusually sweet. Too sweet. She was being extra attentive, cooking my favorite meals, constantly complimenting me, and doing everything she could to make me happy. It felt a bit forced, but I brushed it off, thinking she was just excited about the holidays. Still, curiosity got the better of me. One evening I asked her, half joking, "Sweetheart, you've been amazing lately, more than usual. Is there something I should know? Maybe someone's hoping for a new smartphone or a fancy coat?" Her eyes lit up for a split second before she quickly composed herself. "You're imagining things," she said with a sweet smile. "I'm just being nice because I love you." I could tell she was playing me, but I didn't push it. I decided to let it go and see what would happen next. A couple of days later, she came to me, her face glowing with excitement. "Our company is throwing a huge New Year's party," she said. "And guess what? The boss is bringing in a famous singer. It's going to be incredible. People from all the branches will be there, and my favorite artist is performing." I could see how excited she was. She loved that singer, and the idea of seeing him live was clearly a dream come true. But the thought of her going to a massive corporate party made me uneasy. I hesitated. My first instinct was to say no, to tell her how much I hated these events and why I didn't think she should go. But looking at her glowing face, I caved. "All right," I said, trying to smile. "Go have fun. Just don't get too crazy, okay?" She threw her arms around me, thanking me profusely. I felt a pang of guilt for even considering denying her the chance to have fun. On the night of the party, I helped her get ready. I handed her her dress, her tights, her shoes. She looked stunning. As she finished her makeup, I teased her. That dress is a bit short, don't you think? She laughed, applying lipstick. It's the last time I'll go to a party like this as a single woman, she said. Next year, I'll be your wife. Her words made me smile, and for a moment, all my doubts disappeared. I kissed her goodbye and watched as she left. The evening passed slowly. I sat on the couch watching TV, but my mind kept drifting. I checked my phone a few times, but there were no updates from Amelia. Around midnight, I called her. She answered, sounding tipsy but coherent, saying she was having fun but would be home soon. I waited. I dozed off on the couch, still waiting. I woke up to loud noises, the front door swinging open, something crashing against the wall. Emilia had finally come home, but she was in no state to explain anything. She was completely drunk, barely able to stand. She stumbled into the apartment, knocking over shoes, coats, and anything else in her path. I rushed over, helping her take off her shoes and guiding her to the bedroom. She collapsed onto the bed, still in her fancy dress. I covered her with a blanket, planning to make coffee to sober her up. But as I turned to leave, she mumbled, "Let's go again," and grabbed my pants. I froze. Again? What did she mean? Again since when? Was she so drunk she thought we hadn't done anything yet? Or was she talking about something else? I tried to ignore it, brushing her hand away gently. I walked toward the kitchen, but then she called me again. "Come here," she slurred, pulling off the blanket. I turned around, and that's when I noticed it. Her dress was bunched up around her waist, and her underwear was on backward. I stared in disbelief. I looked closer. Yes, it was definitely inside out. And then I noticed something else. She wasn't wearing a bra. I knew she had been wearing one earlier. I had helped her get dressed. My mind raced. There was only one explanation. No one takes off their underwear in the bathroom and puts it back on inside out. And where was her bra? It was gone. I felt my stomach twist into knots. All the doubts, the fears, the unease, it all came crashing down. This was it. This was the end. I didn't even hesitate. I pulled her up, ignoring her drunken protests, dressed her as best as I could, and dragged her out of the apartment. She stumbled, barely conscious of what was happening. I shoved her into the car and started driving through the dark, empty streets. Her parents' house wasn't far. As we drove, she started to come around. She looked around, blinking at the passing streetlights. "Are we going to karaoke?" she asked, slurring her words. "You said we'd go to karaoke." I couldn't believe it. She still had no idea what was happening or who she was with. We pulled up in front of her parents' house. I rang the doorbell until her father opened the door, looking sleepy and confused. "I'm sorry," I said flatly, "but I thought it was best to bring her here." He stared at me, then at Amelia, disheveled, drunk, barely able to stand. Amelia giggled, throwing her arms up. "Karaoke time!" Her mother appeared behind her father, gasping in shock. "As you can probably guess," I continued, "the wedding's off. I'll send her things over. There's no need to come by." Her mother started crying, trying to say something, but I cut her off. "Check if her underwear is still on the right way," I said coldly. "That should explain everything." I turned and left, slamming the door behind me. I stepped outside into the cold night air, the door closing behind me with a final, echoing thud that felt like the end of a chapter I hadn't been ready to finish. My breath came out in shaky clouds as I stood on their front porch, processing what had just happened. The house behind me was filled with stunned silence. Amelia's parents surely reeling from the sight of their disheveled, drunk daughter and my bitter, emotionless words. I walked slowly toward my car, each step heavy, as if I were dragging not just my body but the weight of shattered dreams. My hands trembled as I unlocked the door and sat in the driver's seat. I didn't turn the engine on right away. I sat there in the darkness, staring at the empty street in front of me, listening to the distant hum of the city that was still asleep. The realization of what had just unfolded began to settle in, and with it came an overwhelming emptiness. I gripped the steering wheel tightly, my knuckles whitening. Anger, sadness, regret. All of it mixed inside me like a storm. A part of me wanted to scream, to break something, to call her and yell at her for what she'd done. But another part of me, the part that had watched her stumble through the doorway in that pathetic state, just felt empty. The future I had envisioned, the wedding, the family, the life we had planned, was gone. And yet I couldn't even bring myself to cry. It was as if I had already mourned the relationship the moment I saw her underwear on backward, the missing bra, the way she giggled and mumbled about karaoke, completely unaware of the betrayal written all over her. I started the engine and drove aimlessly through the quiet streets, the city lights blurring past me. The tears eventually came, slow at first, then heavier, until my vision blurred and I had to pull over. I parked on a deserted street and leaned forward, resting my forehead on the steering wheel as the sobs racked my body. How did it come to this? I had loved Amelia. I had trusted her. We had built a life together, a home, plans for a family. We had talked about kids, vacations, even growing old together. And now all of that felt like a cruel joke. My mind went back to the earlier moments, the way she had been so sweet before the party, going out of her way to make me happy. Was that guilt? Did she know even then that she was going to do something terrible? Or had it been spontaneous? A few too many drinks, bad decisions, and suddenly everything spiraled out of control. But then I remembered her story about her last relationship, how she had gone to a work party alone and woken up next to another guy. She had told me she'd learned her lesson, that it would never happen again, except it had. I realized then that maybe it hadn't been about the party, the drinks, or even the other guy. Maybe this was just who she was, someone who couldn't resist temptation, someone who made excuses for her mistakes until they became patterns. The thought made my stomach twist. I sat there for what felt like hours, just staring into the darkness, letting the weight of everything crush me. But eventually the exhaustion set in. My body felt heavy, my head throbbed, and I knew I couldn't just sit there forever. I drove back to our apartment, well, my apartment now. It felt cold and lifeless when I stepped inside. The faint smell of her perfume still lingered, mixing with the holiday decorations we had put up together just weeks ago. A half-decorated Christmas tree stood in the corner, lights twinkling mockingly, as if they hadn't gotten the memo that everything had fallen apart. I sat on the couch, staring at the tree, and then my eyes drifted to the coffee table where a magazine lay open. A bridal magazine Amelia had been reading. The corners were dog-eared, pages marked with sticky notes, highlighting dresses, floral arrangements, and venues she liked. A sharp pang went through my chest. I grabbed the magazine and threw it across the room, watching it hit the wall and fall to the floor. But even that didn't make me feel better. Nothing would. The next few days passed in a blur. I took time off work, telling my boss I wasn't feeling well, which wasn't a total lie. My phone buzzed constantly, calls and messages from Amelia, her parents, even a few of her friends who had heard what happened. I ignored them all. But late one night, curiosity got the better of me. I scrolled through the unread messages from Amelia. They started with apologies, long, emotional texts filled with regret, explanations, and promises that it didn't mean anything. Then the messages turned desperate. Please, we need to talk. I made a mistake, but I love you. Don't throw everything away. I don't remember half of what happened. It was the alcohol. It wasn't me. And then came the guilt trips. You're just going to leave me like this? After everything? We were supposed to be together forever. I locked my phone and tossed it aside. It was so typical. Excuses, shifting blame, and then trying to manipulate me into forgiving her. But it wasn't going to work. I had made up my mind. I called my landlord and arranged to break the lease early. I couldn't stay in that apartment surrounded by memories of us. I needed a fresh start. I packed her things, carefully, methodically, boxing up her clothes, her books, all her belongings. I didn't want to be spiteful. I just wanted her gone. A week later, a courier came and picked up the boxes to deliver them to her parents' house. I didn't even want to risk seeing her face. It was strange how quickly a life could unravel. One moment I was planning a future with someone I loved, and the next I was sitting alone in an empty apartment, wondering how I could have been so blind. But as painful as it was, there was a small, almost imperceptible sense of relief too. Relief that I had found out before the wedding, before we had kids, before I had gotten in too deep. It was a harsh, bitter blessing, but a blessing nonetheless. I started seeing a therapist not long after. It helped having someone to talk to who wasn't emotionally invested. Slowly, I began to heal. There were still bad days. Nights when I lay awake replaying everything, wondering what I could have done differently. But there were good days too. Days when I felt lighter, freer, as if I had been given a second chance to get it right. Months later, I bumped into Amelia by chance. It was at a grocery store of all places. She looked different, thinner maybe, with tired eyes. She saw me and hesitated before walking over. "Hey," she said softly. "Hi." There was an awkward silence. "You look good," she offered, though I could tell she didn't really mean it. "Thanks." She fidgeted with the strap of her purse. "I just wanted to say, I'm sorry. I know I said it before, but I really mean it. I messed up." I nodded. "Yeah, you did." Another pause. "Have you moved on?" she asked, her voice shaky. I thought about it for a moment. "I'm getting there." She smiled faintly, tears welling in her eyes. "I'm glad. You deserve to be happy." "Thanks, I said, and then I walked away. As I left the store, I felt a strange sense of closure. For the first time in months, I felt like I was finally stepping out of the shadow of what had happened and into something new, something better. Because sometimes the hardest goodbyes are the ones that free you the most.